name is Jason JROCK Houston, and you're listening to Chaotic Riff Magazine. We can be found on the web at www.chaoticriff.com. Our special guest tonight is lead singer Betsy Weiss from the band Bitch. How you doing tonight, Betsy?
I'm okay. How are you? You can call me Betsy Bitch anytime you want.
Okay. I wasn't sure about that. Now, that's a great place to start. Now, if you first front the legendary LA-based band Bitch, now that's quite a name, and I'm sure over the years you got a lot of attention for a name. So, talk a little bit about the decision to name the band that, because that's a cool name, obviously. A lot of people talking about it.
Yeah, well, it wasn't actually my idea. The founding members, guitarist David Caruth and drummer Robbie Settles, they were out here individually. They both lived in Texas, and then they moved to LA, not together. Kind of found each other out here and knew each other from Texas and knew each other as being musicians, and decided that they wanted to form a metal band called Bitch, and they didn't really even necessarily have a female lead singer in mind. They just liked the name.
Wow. So
they actually auditioned a couple of male lead singers and a female guitar player. And then when I answered the ad, then they thought, well, what better name for a female-fronted band than Bitch? So that's when they decided that they were going to change their trajectory and have a female singer.
Yeah, probably, because really the only other band probably at that time that that had like a lot of females in it would be the Runaways. So talk a little bit about how you got the gig. I mean, how they found you. Did you see an ad or?
Yeah, well, I placed an ad, and they answered it. I was fresh out of a band called the Box Boys, who started out as new wave, kind of blondie-ish, what was happening back then. It was the late 70s, I think, like 79-ish, 78, 79. And so we were just kind of going, that route, and then they decided, like, too many other bands are doing this, so they decided to go ska, which was interesting, but not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And I explored it a little bit with them. I sang the songs, and I dressed up in the suit and the tie and the hat and sneakers and skanked, and did those ska dances, and which is called skanking, by the way.
Okay.
And it just wasn't, it wasn't a match made in heaven, to say the least. So it was sort of a mutual parting of the ways. And then I put an ad in to this local music trade paper called The Music Connection, which is, was at that time one of the major ways to hook up with other band members. And they saw my ad and they answered it, and actually had a single out with the Box Boys. So David Caruth, the original guitar player, went out and bought the single just to hear what my voice sounded like, really liked it.
Wow, that's kind of cool. Now, talk about, obviously, after you joined the band, people start calling you Betsy Bitch. Is that something that happened kind of right away, or over the years, people started to refer you?
It was pretty instantaneous. It was kind of a no-brainer, Betsy from Bitch, Betsy Bitch, BB. Kind of rolls off the tongue. So I actually prefer that to Betsy Weiss. Not a lot of people even knew what my last name was for many, many years, and then it leaked out somehow, and so now, it's not that I'm ashamed of it or anything, but my stage name is Betsy Bitch.
And it's kind of because it kind of reminds people of the band's name and where you come from. So I think it's kind of a cool thing. Now, I was reading and getting ready for today's interview that back in the days when the PMRC was just starting to get going, and they were securing all those records, that you were one of the groups that they targeted just because of the band's name and that, and you guys actually thanked them because
they actually targeted us more because of the image and the lyric content, which was singing. Our gimmick back then was S&M and Whips and Chains and V&D. I'm sure they weren't thrilled about the name. I'm sure that was probably on their short list of things they didn't like about us. But it was actually more for the image and the lyric content.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny, the thing about the PMRC and what they were trying to do, censoring all these bands at the time, and it's funny because a lot of the bands are still around, and the PMRC, they're no more. I mean, it's kind of their heyday was just
Yeah, we won.
yeah, like a little bleep second, So it's kind of now. I was also reading that back in the day, your band was actually the first band signed to Metal Blade Records, which is a pretty big thing. They would go on to be one of the better metal labels. So how did you guys initially hook up with them?
Actually, we are, once again, going back to my original guitar player, David Caruth. He struck up a friendship with Brian. Brian used to run a record store called Oz Records here in Southern California, in the area that I live. And he specialized, Brian being, way ahead of his time, he specialized in like all the imports and the picture discs and the new wave of British heavy metal, all the, obscure stuff. And David was a huge collector of that before I even met him. So he found out about Brian's store and, frequented it, it's hard to say, quite a bit. And then they struck up a friendship, and that was just about the same time that Brian was starting up Metal Blade, running it out of his mother's garage in Woodland Hills.
Wow.
And that was at the exact same time that David was forming the band. So it was just, the timing of it, just really worked out perfectly. And, Brian, he put us on a couple of Metal Massacre compilations before he ever released anything for us as a band. But that's how we got together with him.
And so I know also back in the Sunset Strip days, when the Strip was still like the place where all the bands went and stuff, you guys were pretty big attraction back in the day. And I was reading you guys had done shows with like Wasp and Armored Saint when these bands were just, I could imagine a Bitch show and a Wasp show. That must have been a pretty cool lineup.
Yeah, the Troubadour, which is a club here in West Hollywood, it's actually the first place we ever played is Bitch. They loved to book Bitch and Wasp together because we were both, very theatrical bands, and we were a good, pairing of bands. So yeah, we used to play with them all the time. We've played, Metallica opened up for us in San Francisco at this place called The Stone back in 1982, I believe it was, 82, 83. And Slayer opened up for us at the Roxy here in Hollywood, and also at a club, auditorium rather, down in San Luis Obispo, which is a beach community about 6 hours north of here, of Southern California. So yeah, we've played, with everybody, Black and Blue, Rat.
Wow.
Yeah, because Rat was on Metal Blade for a while too.
It's kind of funny because Rat is one of those '80s bands where people think, I can't believe like a band like Bitch and Rat would be on the same show, but Rat, especially when they just came out with that EP back in 1983, they were doing a lot of their stuff was a lot heavier than what they would go on to do.
Yeah, and they were on, I believe it was either the first or second Metal Massacre compilation, and they used to Metal Blade, like to team up their bands a lot, so that's why we played a lot with Armored Saint, Lizzie Borden, and all the Metal Blade roster bands. Sarah Bungle we played with a lot.
Now initially, you when you joined the band, since the other guys had kind of formed the band, did you initially have a lot to do with the writing, or did they have already a lot of the songs already written when you joined?
They had a few songs, not many, but I was more instrumental, no pun intended, in lyric writing because that's what I do. I write. I'm a word person, and I write lyrics. So the way we would work it is they would write the song musically, arrange it, and give it to me, and I'd write vocal melody and lyrics to it. Occasionally, we just come up with one at rehearsal, just as a group. But for the most part, that's the way it worked. And
let me ask you, Betsy, from the time you joined the band, how long was it till you guys really started playing locally around the LA club scene there? And and did it take you to get the record deal and all that? Was it very long?
I'm sorry. Can you just repeat the question one more time?
Okay, from the time you joined the band, I mean, was it very long that things started really taking off for a band as far as getting a lot of gigs around the Sunset Strip and that?
We started in right away. We wanted to get the momentum going. the record deal really just sort of came after it. We just wanted to get out there and, hit people over the head with the image, and, all that we used to have, lots of props on stage. We had a big pegboard with whips and chains and handcuffs, and I used to drag a slave, a real live, 6'3" slave out onto the stage, and so we wanted to just get that going, quickly to get the buzz going. Start the conversation.
Yeah, probably outside of Wasp at that time, probably the closest thing they had to a major rock show or like a real major live show that people could go to like that would be maybe on a much bigger scale, though, of course, like Alice Cooper or Kiss, where you go see a band and it was much. The show was much more than just 5 guys in jeans and t-shirts, just strumming their guitars. So, did you guys? How long did it take you to kind of come up with all the ideas for your stage show? Like, we're going to really be a different type of band. We're going to really offer our audience something different than everybody else.
All that evolved pretty quickly. We had a vision. We decided what we were going to do, and we started writing, songs like "Live for the Whip," which I think was our very first song, and "Leather Bound," and me being influenced almost exclusively by Alice Cooper as a performer.
Wow.
I was really game to do something visual in addition to just music and singing. I wanted to kind of be the female Alice Cooper.
Wow, it's funny you say that because I've seen Alice Cooper a couple times live, and he's one of my all-time favorite rock stars, whatever you want to call it. I mean, he calls himself a shock rocker, but the thing about seeing Alice, I mean, I've seen him the last couple of years, and the guy's he's almost 70 years old, close to it, and
he is 70. He just turned 70.
Yeah, well, and my point being is, he still put on a rockin' stage show. I mean, I don't know where the guy gets his energy from, and he's just such a creative guy. And the thing about Alice is ultimately that was a band where just you had one guy ultimately was kind of a main character, a main guy getting dressed up, and then he had the other band members. And that's kind of, I guess, where Kiss kind of took it, where, okay, well, we were influenced by Alice, but instead of being a band where just one guy gets dressed up, we're going to be a band where everybody gets dressed up. So that's kind of interesting that you were influenced by Alice. Now, besides Alice, who else were you influenced by?
Haven't you ever noticed in any of my photos my Alice Cooper tattoo on my left bicep?
I never looked close enough. I have to look. But,
look on some of my Facebook pictures, and you'll see it very prominently displayed on my left bicep. But I've met him several times, and I've seen him every single time he's played out here, so I can't even count how many times I've seen him in concert, and he's just always has been amazing. He fascinates me. He does what he does, ingeniously, and he's still doing it great, and his band is always kick-ass.
That's what I was going to say about Alice, too.
If he can keep going, so can I.
That's what I was going to say about Alice. He always surrounds himself with very talented musicians. I mean, one of the guitar players in his band is this female guitar player, Nita Strauss. She's very talented at what she does.
Yeah, I know who she is.
And it's like, wow. And they're the band members are so much younger than Alice, but man, I mean, he surrounds himself by very talented players, and I think that's makes him the ultimate performer, if you will.
Yeah, that's what's keeping his formula going now too. Is just all the great players that he chooses, and they are quite a bit younger than him, but they make him look good, and he keeps up with them as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, see, that's what it's all about. I mean, when you got a band, you want everybody to shine, and that I think when you have different band members that kind of they got that talent too, where each person kind of brings something to the table. Now, of course, you were big here. We were saying back in the day, the Hollywood scene back in the day, and however, Bitch has been around all these years. So I got to ask you, the music business being what it is, what has kept you going all these years?
That I can.
That's a great attitude.
That people want me to, and people want to see the band, and I still can bring it. And my band, even though I'm the only original member, my band, my lineup is kick-ass right now, and I still look decent, and so I'm going to keep going as long as I can.
Well, that's great. Now,
we just played last night, as a matter of fact.
And then, initially, Betsy, when I contacted you a few weeks ago about doing this, you were playing the Ultimate Jam night. They were having like a Motley Crue themed night. Now, I was curious, how did you get involved with taking part in that event, and what were the songs you played that night?
I'm part of the Jam family, as we're called.
Okay.
The people that put it on are good friends of mine, and I've been kind of doing it ever since the inception of it. Now there's like so many people that want to do it that I don't get, my time's up there few and far between. Yeah. It's only usually only one song per performer. Sometimes, more, like if it's like they had this guy up there who does a Vince Neil tribute band, or Motley Crue tribute band, and he plays Vince Neil in it, so they let him do like 3 songs. But I sang one. I sang Same Old Situation.
Oh, wow, that's a great song. And talking about the fact that you took part in the Dirt movie soundtrack, it's kind of interesting because I got the soundtrack myself, and Dr. Feelgood, which Same Old Situation comes off, that's the number 1 album by the band. And yet, half the soundtrack is like the very first album, Too Fast for Love. You got like 6 or 7 songs off that one album. But I guess that's kind of what the movie kind of is really centers around that time period. But it's great music. And I've got to ask you, have you ever encountered the Motley guys over the years?
I knew Nicky quite well before he started Motley Crue. He was in a band called London.
Yeah. Wow.
And he and I, knew each other just from music and hanging out. And we actually used to talk on the phone. And he actually ran the name Motley Crue by me. He said, I'm going to start this band pretty soon. What do you think of this name, Motley Crue? And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. That sounds good. So I knew him, and and I don't know the other guys personally, but we have crossed paths before.
Yeah, Nicky's another one of those guys like Alice. I mean, it's amazing. He's such a genius. I mean, he is really the reason that band's had the success. I mean, he's the principal songwriter. I mean, and it's funny hearing him talk in interviews. Like, I hear him talk about, like, for example, back when they were doing Shout the Devil, he was saying that, hey, let's have the, I heard him say, like, let's have the word devil in the title, and get people talking about the album. And he says we wanted to go for a darker image, and that's why he had all the blood and all the photos were black. I mean, it's just amazing the way this guy's, brain works. And I don't think it's really a surprise to anybody that knows him that he's had the, level of success that he's had.
Yeah, he was very, entrepreneurial about the way he started this band. He was very industrious. He knew what he wanted to do. He knew the direction he wanted to go. London was sort of fizzling out, kind of, he was ready for a change. London was a really good band, by the way, the band he used to play.
Yeah, London, as I'm sure you know, is one of those bands that, from the Hollywood scene, that they've kind of, they've at one time or another, they featured a lot of famous people who've gone through that band. I understand, like Slash, Nicky, Fred Corey from Cinderella, and a handful of other guys. So, it's kind of...
Slash? I never heard Slash used to be in London. That's a new one on me.
Well, see, that's something I've read. It may or may not be true, but I read that somewhere on the internet, so may or may not be true. But
I can pretty much guarantee you that's false. That's fake news.
Fake news. Okay, yeah. Fake news is still.
No, but Nicky was very, that was like his baby. He really wanted to make it work, and he found Tommy, and then it was, and it was all, the rest is history.
Yeah, in fact, I saw the Dirt movie, that's on Netflix currently, and it's funny. One of the beginning scenes in the movie is where supposedly Nicky and Tommy meet like at a club, and Nicky's just played like a gig with London, and supposedly Tommy's like the biggest London fan. He's like, "Oh, Nicky, man, I'm the biggest Nicky Six fan. We got to form a band together." And he had a big Nicky Six poster on his wall. But I thought for what it was, the movie, I thought it was pretty decent. Pretty.
I will see it. I have not. I've seen like little bits and pieces of it, but it's on my short list of movies to see.
Yeah, because I will say this about the movie. I understand because you only got 2 hours in the movie. There's only so much stuff they can fit in, but the kind of a timeline is like all over the place. For example, the movie's pretty much during the '80s heyday, and it's got about Vince Neil's daughter dying in there when she wasn't even born until like the '90s. But then again, like you said, then again you kind of think,
well, poetic license there, huh?
Yeah, and then you kind of think, well, okay, I could see why you'd include that. That'd be kind of a major thing in the guy's life. But I was very surprised that I didn't think they would include anything about John Corabi. That there's a little scene where the camera goes to this one guy and you kind of know, okay, that's Corabi. They say like, this is our new singer Corabi, and he's in the picture for like a brief second. But I thought, okay, at least they include that part of the band's history, you know?
I heard it is kind of, kind of jumps around as far as time frames go. It's sort of not consistent, not really accurate. But I guess they got their message across. They probably just wanted to touch on as much as they could, so they took some liberties as far as the timeline went.
Yeah, and I will say that the guys that they got to do, Tommy and Nicky, were probably the two best actors in the whole movie. So those guys really look like they had their parts down. Now, like I said, your band's been around since 1980, Betsy. And I was curious. The band never broke out in a huge way, but you guys are still doing what you do. And so with that being said, I was curious. Did you ever give any thought to like not doing anything necessarily like the Dirt, but would you ever how create like an independent a documentary put together by the band kind of about your history, just for people that
that sounds like food for thought. I never really thought about it, but we probably could. There actually is a documentary coming out by a group of women filmmakers called what's it called? This Is It, or Here It Is, or Here You Go, or something like that. But anyway, they came out here several months ago to interview me, and they actually went to Chicago when we played a festival in Chicago last year. They came out and filmed the show for the movie. So I mean that's partially what you're talking about. But as far as like us coming out with our own, I don't know, maybe why not?
I look forward to it, and I bring it up because it's amazing how many of these bands are coming out with movies, and I realize that you probably don't have the same budget to work with as, say, Motley Crue. But I'll give you a good example of this. Like I'm sure you've heard of the band Bang Tango. I interviewed one of the current guitar players, Drew Fortier, and he was the guy who initially came in. He's now in the band. He initially came in because they hired him to film like a documentary about Bang Tango's history. And the film, you can go online and just type in like Bang Tango movie, and you can watch it on YouTube for free. And the funny thing, that's what he was kind of telling me. People want to buy this thing. They just tell the band, hey, put it out on DVD and this and that, and we'll go out and buy it. He says, you know what? Everybody's already seen it for free. We put it on the web, and it's kind of got like a cult following or whatever.
Yeah, I'm hoping that I can, because I don't get Netflix, so I'm hoping that I can find like a pirated copy of The Dirt somehow.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah, and I'm sure eventually it's going to come out on DVD. I would think, because it's so popular, and the Motley Crue fans would probably want something like that. I mean, they do have a soundtrack, and it's funny because a couple of years ago when they did their final show, Nicky and the guys swore, we'll never do another live show. We signed a contract and this and that. Funny thing is, since the movie's come out, the book that came out like 10 years ago, it's already becoming a #1 bestseller again. All their music online is streaming. People are going online and buying all the Motley Crue albums. Everything's popular again. And I've heard like Nicky and some other guys say, is there any way you guys will ever do another show? Well, we're not saying never. So who knows what may become of this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look at Kiss. Look at how many farewell tours they've had, How can we miss you if you won't go away?
Yeah. Now, like I said, you guys never broke out in a huge way, but you guys are still a huge fixture, like you're saying, in Hollywood, and you guys are playing, I know, shows all the time. I'm seeing on Facebook, you guys always got ads, but you ever get a chance to go?
We actually get more, we're not so much in Hollywood. I mean, we do get a good response, but when we play out of town, that's really when the crowds come out. You know, it's really hard to get people to come out in LA. You know, and we've played anywhere and everywhere we can play in LA, so we don't play that much in LA anymore.
Okay,
you know,
okay.
when you from the 80s, you're kind of over it. But, you know, we kind of pick and choose our better gigs. But, you know, the better ones have been actually the out-of-town festivals that we've played. Like last year we played the Legions of Metal Festival in Chicago. The year before that we played Defenders of the Old in New York. A couple years before that I played in Germany and Holland and Belgium, you know, with another band that toured with me. You know, so it's really not even so much, you know, that we're like, you know, the Hollywood, you know, VIPs. It's more like when we get out of town, that's when it really...
Oh, okay, well, that's very interesting, because that was going to be my next question, actually. You guys, I probably see a lot of the stuff, because like you said, you're kind of a fixture with Ultimate Jam Night. I see a lot of those ads, so that might be what I'm thinking of. But in any event, that's great to hear that you guys get the chance to go other places. And I was curious, because you guys have been doing this long enough, and you don't really need to, but do you have any desire or any plans to for like a new CD or any new music coming out from the band?
Oh yeah, we're writing now.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, this lineup that I have, we just kind of recently, after, you know, all these festivals and gigs, you know, the retro 80s stuff, they all want you to play, you know, your old material, so we weren't really, like, focused on writing anything new, but, you know, now that that's sort of, you know, calmed down a bit, or there's really nothing in the offing, we're concentrating on writing new material.
And, you know, and I kind of think that's cool because, see, that's the thing. A lot of bands, because the music industry is what it is today, a lot of people aren't buying music like they used to. So a lot of bands have attitude, you know, we're just going to live off our catalog of music, and some bands can do that. But I really, you know, think it's a cool thing when bands continue to put out new product, you know, and you know, things being the way they are, you know, if you want to test like a new song, you could put up on your Facebook page or up on the internet and see kind of how the fans react to it before you know, release a full-length album or anything like that. and that's kind of what else I was gonna kind of back comparing to like when you guys were first starting out and you're making your first album. What do you think of the way you know, records are made today, where a lot of bands go in there, you don't necessarily have to record a full-length album. Some bands put like out a 4 or 5 song EP versus the way it used to be done.
That's actually what we're thinking about doing, just so we can come out with something quicker, you know, not have to wait until we get 10 or 11 songs perfected. You know, we want to, you know, maybe put out 5 or 6, you know, and see how that goes. Get something out there more expeditiously than waiting for a whole bunch more songs to come to fruition.
Yeah, well, once again, Betsy, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to me. And maybe when that time comes and you drop some new music, you can get in touch with me. I'd love to help you promote that. But let's keep in touch.
That'll be great.
Anything you have